Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and however you are listening to this episode, it's great to have you here. Resilience is the topic for this episode of the podcast. It's a bit of a buzzword, however, it is so for good reason. Year on year, organisations have been pushing harder than ever before, and with the COVID coronavirus lockdown, it has never been more relevant to understand the mechanics and the mindset of what being resilient really means. So we explore this over the next 30 minutes or so, and I'm joined by the great and powerful Kevin Green, the insightful and tenacious Stu Trevener, and of course myself, your host Guy Bloom. On that note, enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Leadership Bites with your host Guy Bloom, a leadership podcast, conversations, just me talking and occasional interviews. Check us out at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and tell everyone. Now, as this is the first time that we've had the three of us on, history, technology literate, and ready to actually do this. So I'm particularly excited.
It's a breakthrough moment.
It is a breakthrough moment. Yes. Years from now, we'll remember,
Do you remember
the day.
when?
Yeah, exactly. I'm actually just going to try and change my headphones. Just bear with me 1 second.
Sure.
Just trying to show off because I've got two sets of headphones. But
So have you got a man loft, Stu?
Oh, it went echoey then. I am in my man loft.
Have you got PlayStations up there as well as office desks and stuff?
Depend who's asking.
So it's only me, mate, and I promise I won't tell. And have you got a lock on the door?
Right, much better. So resilient, right? Just starting with that as a first port of call. And I guess maybe it's worth just trying to understand what we mean when we say the word resilient and what that means.
I think the two, because you said two things, you said well-being and resilient. And I think there's this thing of resilience is something you do when things aren't going well and you get the knockback, your ability to then come back from it. But for me, I think resilience is, there's a little more proactivity to it. Do you know what I mean? It's something that should be done preemptively to avoid a negative state that there is need for resilience might be trying to alleviate. But yeah, and I think you're right, it is a buzzword, particularly now for what's going on around us. But there is almost this acceptance that if you're going to be a leader, it's going to be difficult. Therefore, you need to be resilient or have some sense of resilience about you.
What about for you, Kev? When you hear that word resilience or being resilient, what does it mean for you?
So in my head, it's always appealed to me that it's tests or asks me about my ability to bounce back, my ability to reinvent myself, my ability to come back just as good as I was, if not better, after a setback. It's about how long I stay in a trough of emotional sadness. Those are all the measures that run around in my head when I think of resilience. My ability to come back. How quickly can I do it?
If you weren't resilient or were able to demonstrate resilience, what would you be? If it's almost resilience is the antidote or the skill or the attitude.
Yeah.
In the absence of it, what would we be having or experiencing?
Speaking on behalf of myself only, I will start. If I recognise that my resilience is being attacked, I would disengage, I would withdraw, and worst case scenario, I start sulking. And it's the length of time that I withdraw and disengage, knowing that my resilience is being threatened or is under attack, and then I'm responsible for finding my way back from out of that again.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the phrase bounce back ability, which is a good sort of summary, maybe a good summary for it. And I think if you're not resilient, you have an emotional deficit. The world, the life that we're in, takes from you, from the trials and tribulations that we go through. It's almost as if you're not able to metaphorically plug yourself back into the mains and charge yourself back up again. So I think it leaves you weaker, and it leaves me, others, in a situation where you're vulnerable emotionally, vulnerable physically, not from being physically attacked, but it affects your nervous system, your capacity to remain healthy and those kind of things. So I think when you are not resilient, you may have a manifestation at work, maybe where, your energies are a bit low, or you're not volunteering for things, or you're not as engaged as you used to be. But at a personal level, that's because there is less of you to give.
Mm-hmm. So can I give you, there's a reason why I asked them. So I don't want to make this all about linking back to the coronavirus because I think that's all anyone seems to be talking about at the moment. But was it Monday last week? So this was the first, it was either Monday or the Tuesday, I can't remember. It was the first day that I'd had work cancelled from my diary. So I was then sat at home with a clear diary, but the kids were still in school. So I was downstairs, and because this was all starting to kind of escalate, I had Sky News on, and I was just in the kitchen. I'd speak to someone on the phone, I'd do whatever, and I realised I had it on for about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours in the background, and that was becoming my focus for how I was starting to feel about what was happening. There was nothing physically happening to me, but just exposure to those constant kind of messages. And what you've just described there about that lesser version of myself, or lack, I can't remember the words you used. You say lack of energy? I think it was one of the words you just used to describe.
I don't know. It's just really important that when I'm saying something, at least one of us is listening.
Yeah, okay.
I have no idea what I just said.
I mean, you say a lot. There's a lot
exactly,
out there, right?
Exactly.
But it was a lack of energy and
a lack of energy, right? Cool. So that lack of energy, that feeling of vulnerability, I was experiencing. I hadn't had anything happen to me per se. I was just exposed to a lot of these kind of negative messages that I saw, and I had a moment. I was like, I need to get out of here. I need to switch this off and get out. And I went for a run. I came back 45 minutes later, and I felt great. And actually, nothing has changed about the virus, or nothing's changed in the environment around me. But what has changed is what I guess what I'm choosing to give focus to. And I just think that sometimes we think about resilience being, I think bounce back ability is a good expression in the face of a big setback. But I hadn't had a big setback. But you could almost say at that moment in time, I wasn't feeling resilient, and I had to make a decision to kind of do something about it. And I think subsequently, since then, I'm trying not to look at Twitter too much or watch the news too much, because it only takes a limited period of time, and you start to get that kind of feeling back that you described earlier on. And that's why I think for me, when I said before about resilience, is as opposed to being reactive to a setback, which I think it is a way it is demonstrated, it is taking those proactive steps to do something, to almost not fall into that kind of less of, and I use the expression less aversion averse kind of state, which I think is how I would explain when I'm not feeling resilient, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What was the time span that you spent there, Stu? I'm kind of trying to add it up in my head, and it sounded like an hour and a half. Where you
it was just an hour and a half of just kind of seeing the articles come in, and there's various stories about supermarkets and what's happening in Italy and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it was about 90 minutes, and I guess the equivalent is, within a leadership role, although you might not have Sky News constantly feeding you the news, I guess you're still choosing the stuff that gets your focus around you. And that for me is where I think there's this proactive approach of what you are choosing. If it's going to give you that less energetic state or that more vulnerable state, can you or do you have choice to focus on other things?
Yeah.
I think the question, what does resilience look like? Well, I think for me, part of it is around consciousness of what I choose to give mindset or focus time to,
and how long it takes you to notice it.
Yeah, and I think that's I think there's notice. We're going to go a bit deep here. There's what I'm thinking about, and then there's noticing what I'm thinking about, which I think is almost that it's like another layer of thinking.
You're talking about almost mindfulness, which is that conscious alertness to almost what it is that you are deciding to put your focus onto, and maybe these things are all concentric circles. There's definitely something in resilience that it could be from an action that is quite large, or it could be from little things. The way that somebody negates you in a meeting, or if somebody senior disregards your opinion, or all the way through to something more cataclysmic. So there is something about the trials and tribulations that we face in life in a commercial space to go from the small to the large. So resilience isn't just necessarily, I don't think, what I decide to give my focus to, though I think it is a component part of being able to stay resilient. The way that we react when we're put under pressure, which is probably a different question to what resilience is, but how do I then react when I think you used the word, Kevin, under threat. I don't know if you used that or I just made that up, but let's just say I'm under some...
What is important though is at least one or other of us is listening to what I'm saying.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure you said that, and if not, I've just made it up and it's now true. It is that when you said that, Kevin, that my reaction to that might be a kind of mindfulness approach. What am I giving my focus to? Can I change the state of my focus and, i.e., go for a run or turn that down, that volume down on? It could be the TV, but it could be the circle of people I'm in or the conversations that I'm allowing to run in front of me, because actually they don't just affect me, but they infect me. So there's a whole load of things like that. But I suppose that leads to a bigger question then of what is it that keeps an individual resilient? If resilience is my bounce back ability, my capacity to stay strong might be the wrong word, but to have my version of being emotionally fit and capable of dealing with the ebbs and flow of daily life, what are the component factors that will allow me to stay like that? And definitely, I think that mindfulness, that conscious thought is definitely one of them.
So I think you're probably way past me on this one, Guy, but I reckon there's a living brave model that can come out of this podcast by the end of it around what's the algorithm, what's the formula for identification of how resilient somebody is. But taking your comments and listening to Stu's example, I think the factors in play are going to be something around what is your normal state of consciousness? How present are you in the world? The greater that presence is, the more likely you are to be able to identify what's threatening your resilience in the moment. And I think it also is measurable by your natural susceptibility to fall prey to those threats. And then there's a length of time that you're willing to stay there after you've noticed that your resilience is being threatened. That's another factor, time spent at the bottom of that curve. And then your willingness and ability to take a conscious decision like Stu did to fire off a change of chemicals in the bloodstream, on this occasion by Stu going for a run, which fixes it.
Yeah, say those again.
So I reckon it's a combination of factors.
Yeah,
that you could model, that you could bottle, so that we end up with an algorithm or a formula. And I reckon the factors, just listening to Stu's example and your complimentary comments, I think it depends on somebody's ability to be conscious in the world, to stay present in the moment. The more present somebody is, they are more capable of identifying the threats to their levels of resilience. And I think their presence also is measured by their susceptibility to fall prey to threats to the resilience. The amount of time somebody is willing to spend whilst being prey to attacks on resilience, and then the length of time it takes you and I to take a conscious decision to do something about it, to alter, I think, what most people might know as neurochemistry. And on Stu's example, he took the conscious decision to go for a run so that he didn't spend too long in the bottom of that curve, because he realised that he needed to take a decision, because otherwise he was falling prey to the news bulletins and the wash of Twitter feeds that were of a negative nature. So that's why I'm interested in the amount of time. And in Stu's example of an hour and a half, I think that's indicative of a resilient person. It only took me 90 minutes. It only took Stu 90 minutes to notice all of those things going on and do something about it to fix it. I think if people are non-resilient, because that's where we started off originally, if people are not resilient, they are just a victim of the circumstance for far too long, and they don't take the conscious decision to do something different.
I think what you said before, Guy, about that was a component part of being resilient. But I think, what does resilient look like? I know for me that's my kind of get out of jail, if you know what I mean. When I'm kind of not in that place, I do that and I feel better. And I think it's that there's the trigger, right? Feel it. Let me make a conscious choice to do something with it. And I think the opposite of that, if I'm not being resilient, it may be recognition of what's going on, and I think the word you used, Kevin, was a willingness to do something about it. Yeah. I kind of move on. You know, we did some. I did some stuff recently in a bank, and we did a couple of days with some senior leaders about best version of us and well-being. And there was a whole. We asked a series of questions about how much exercise do we do? Are we conscious of the food and drink that we take in? And everyone knew all the right answers. You know, how many hours of sleep you should have, and you should exercise sometimes. But we were so busy that we didn't have time to do it. And I think it's what you said. Is there a willingness that when we are in a defensive place or we're feeling vulnerable, do we actually proactively do something about it, or do we then just operate under the influence of it, and it's almost that vicious cycle of it kind of continuing?
I agree. There's always a conscious competence. It's like if you hit fog and you're driving, you become suddenly very consciously competent. Even though you know how to drive a car, you become hyper alert. So you might realise my resilience is low. I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling threatened. I'm feeling emotional. I'm feeling scared. And do I have the conscious competence? It's almost as if I know how to give feedback. And generally speaking, I never think about giving feedback. I just give it. But if I suddenly realise I'm giving feedback and it's going wrong, or this is quite important, I need to do it right, I can become consciously competent because I have a methodology. So I think there is something that's there that says, do I have a method, a craft, or a competence around being resilient on purpose? Because I recognize that I have to do something to break this cycle or this experience, or I can see a horizon where that's going to be very challenging. So can I prepare myself ahead of the game for what will be a challenging time? And often with these things is if you are constantly doing that on purpose, then actually it becomes unconscious competence, and then you go to it when you actually realize that your normal behavior just needs extra effort attached to it. I think that's true. And I've got 4, you talk about a model, Kevin, and you know I love a model. So
do you have one, Guy? Have you got one to hand?
Well, believe it or not. I mean, funny you should ask. But yeah, go on, blimey. Here we go. So I've got 4 quadrants. These aren't really things I've created, so this isn't
Guy,
a Guy
I
Bloom
need to
invention.
know.
Yeah, go on.
I need to know, did you just sketch this up in the moment? Or
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh, is it one of these ones? Okay, let's get it out. Let's do it.
Well, this is why I have these conversations, right? Because it brings out what you know, right? It puts it into a conscious place. So this isn't revolutionary, but there are 4 quadrants: physical, emotional, mental, and connected. Now, and I'll just quickly explain those. Your physical well-being is not, do I have a six-pack? Luckily, that's not the criteria. Is, because only Stu would probably win that one, is in terms of, am I...
If anyone is listening to this, that's not statistically correct, okay?
No,
I'm sure there's a different image of you.
No. You've definitely got a six-pack, I'm sure you have. The point being, though, am I able to nurture and safeguard my body? Take my brain out of it. Do I have a level of fitness that is contextual to my age and the life that I'm living? So without defining how fit you have to be, there is a level that is right for you. And that would be the conscious competence to know what that is and to keep track on it. Because being a 50-year-old, that's different to when I was a 20-year-old, and my metabolism has shifted. So you guys know that I shifted my diet recently about a year ago to only eating once a day. Doesn't matter if that's the right thing or the wrong thing to do, but when I was 20, I could eat 20 pizzas in the morning and it didn't matter. But now my metabolism has shifted and I can't. So my physical well-being was, I was having breakfast and I was tired by lunchtime. I'd have lunch to feed the engine, but I was tired at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And when I stopped having breakfast and lunch and I just went to a dinner, my energy levels absolutely stayed level all day. Now, different for different people, but that physical awareness about what's right for you. Emotional, I've got that as my positivity or negativity around my outlook, my self-regulation around how I am able to regulate my emotional state and to be able to deal with the slings and arrows of the day in a manner that allow me to stay on an even keel emotionally. And in some models, rather than connected, I see spiritual. And I'm staying away from that word because I think that's loaded with a whole load of other things around being religious or being of a spiritual type. And I don't think it's about that. I think it's about what are you connected to outside of your own need. That I think is key. In terms of the values that I have, in terms of the things that I believe to be true, that's more in the mental game. But I think in terms of, am I connected? Am I connected to things outside of my own need? Could be your children, could be your family, it could be a social network, it could be vision that you have for the organisation, could be a load of things. But what am I connected to? Because if I'm not connected to anything outside of my own need, then when I feel threatened or attacked or whatever it is, then if it's only about me, I have nothing else to contribute to that can give me an empowerment, i.e. I've got a family that I need to feed who look to me to be stronger or whatever that might be. So if I have no external connection to myself that I care about, it's hard to use that as a lifeline to keep me emotionally where I need to be. And then in terms of mental, it's that I think this is the craft and the intelligence of seeing life as a journey, about seeing life as being about learning and about actually having the mental acuity to consciously look at the physical, the emotional, and the connected, and to learn and to have conversations and to have opinions and to calibrate through your intellect. It doesn't mean that you are an intellectual, but through your intellect, and seeing it as a job of work that needs to be done from the brain to allow the other three things to happen. I come at resilience as being those four domains. If you mentally don't work on it, you probably stay at a certain level. If you physically don't look after yourself, your body won't support the physical needs that you have to stay emotionally strong, etc., etc., etc. So I don't think anyone is necessarily the lead, other than probably mental. I think if the brain doesn't start the thinking, if it doesn't start as an intellectual endeavour, then it can't turn into action. But if it just stays in your head, as it does with a lot of people, resilience very important. What do you do about it? Absolutely nothing. Well, then it's intellectual mastication. And I did say mastication. Yeah, I'll pause there. That's the model.
So, Guy, I got a challenge for you in that I want to speak to you as a leader of others, because this is a leadership podcast. A little while ago, you said, typically, I don't think about giving feedback. I just give it. So unless you are being conscious and present in the moment, if you just give feedback and don't run that feedback through any filters around situational sensing, environment, what's my relationship like with the recipient of this feedback, you could be the person responsible for threatening somebody else's level of resilience.
Yes, you could be.
So, of course, what I'm hoping we could agree is, as the deliverer, as the provider of feedback, we have a responsibility to calibrate and sense check. Who am I talking to? What's my existing relationship? What's the track record of our give and take through the course of our relationship? And the recipient of a piece of feedback also has a duty to build their own levels of resilience independently. And I think success will fall somewhere in the middle.
I agree. Did you just run that feedback through a feedback methodology, or
no?
Why not? Am I not important enough to you?
Well, because I want to be out and respond in the moment.
Exactly. So that's hilarious. So yeah, when I say, I don't always reflect on
I can rewind
feedback
and say yes and do a good job of justifying it.
No, the honesty of it, the situation is, I think when we are at a level of competence, a lot of what we do is in the moment. We don't necessarily have to put the language that we're about to use through a filter, other than what we might do is activate the awareness that, for example, this is quite important. So there are levels of conversation, aren't there? The unregulated, I'm not really paying attention to it other than we're talking, and my opinions are loosely being offered, through to that I'm with a client, or I'm with a key stakeholder, or I'm with somebody that really needs me to say the right thing. That awareness itself heightens the toolbox that I select my words from, or whatever that might be. But then I think there's the conscious craft of, I'm just about to go and give a keynote speech, or I'm just about to go in with a senior player, I'm just about to address the troops. So I'm going to craft it and I'm going to ensure that it's correct. I think all of these things have a level of general moving through life, because applying the model to every conversation for every context you're in would be exhausting, through to then the conscious competence of recognizing when I need to pay attention to either others or myself to have the impact that I want to have. Would that be fair?
That would be very fair.
Group hug. Brilliant.
High five. High five. One of the outputs of this podcast, and can you'll sketch that up and ping that over to us to have a look at, those 4 quadrants?
Absolutely.
So that we can all deepen our understanding. Thank you.
Completely agree. And you're right. I don't think there's any one that has a greater level of importance over the other. I think it's identifying which of those 4 for you is the one that you might want to put the intentional focus around. And I think the connected one is quite an interesting one, because say resilience is, it's something that's a term that's bandied about a lot at the moment. We've got a big thing about speaking up and talking to each other at the moment. It's to not harbour things and not to carry the kind of negative thought processes that we have around with us, to reach out to somebody, to share those views and to talk. And part of our role when we're out and about doing what we do through coaching or running group sessions is quite often that willingness to really share of ourselves to others can also be quite a reassuring confidence builder, if that makes sense. So
100%, Stu. Yeah, absolutely agree.
And I think it was only, I don't know how, was it? It was on it was on prime time. It was on Saturday night, wasn't it, one night? And I don't know what the show was, but prime time, ITV, during one of the ad breaks.
Please make it be Ant and Dec's Saturday night takeaway.
I don't know if it might have been, mate. But I think there was For every ad break, there was the advertisers had paid for the slot, but there was no ad. It was that they were trying to encourage people to stop and talk to those people that were around them.
I remember.
Did you see this?
Yeah,
was it Ant and Dec?
I don't know, mate, but yeah, I remember the ad clearly.
But it's one of those things that I think, again, I don't think there's anything you've said there that's particularly profound. Not to take that away from you, Guy.
Hold on a minute.
Hang on. But again,
that's definitely getting edited out.
I'll not tell you the private messages you sent me. But I think it's that consciously choosing to give it focus. Do you know what I mean? And it's that thing of, I bet, the one of connected, I think, is really quite a powerful one. That how many times have you had a conversation with somebody else that's not in a great space, and you've said, it's really important that you talk about this. You feel free to come and speak to me anytime you want. That's almost the advice we give externally. How often do we give that advice to ourselves? Do you know what I mean? Particularly when we're in those states to reach out and do that kind of stuff.
Stu, 100% again. And the only reason I want to support that 100% is because I'm personally going through it during these times. I think during the course of our work, we end up sharing all day, every day, providing that advice, which is gratefully received by most people. But at the end of the day, I feel like most of the time I've used up all my share tokens. But it's only been this week and a little bit last week that I felt the need to reach out, have conversations, rekindle relationships, and I feel better because of it. I've experienced the benefit of what we dish out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's indicative of the leader's role, isn't it? It's a similar thing, though we may be magnets for people seeking our counsel. And I think one of the key probably indicators about your standing in a community is who, if anybody, seeks out your counsel. And that doesn't mean that you're the wise Yoda character that everybody comes to, but it is indicative of seniority that people look to you for direction, motivation, understanding, even if there's an ambiguity in your response of, I do not know, but let me tell you how we're going to approach the I don't know, and those kind of things. And I think that is tiring. There is a battery that is depleted in being present and connected for others. And the resilience part would be, how do I maintain that constant, I was going to say that constant consistency, but that consistency without it turning into a charade that then exhausts me and I'm damaged by it. And I think that is where there is something very important around, for example, yes, am I physically in a position where I'm getting enough sleep? Am I emotionally in a situation where I feel as if I'm very clear about my own sense of mental health and well-being? But that connected part, I really do believe that if you are in a work context and you really don't value what the company does, and you do not trust the people that are leading you, or you are the leader and you don't trust the people that you have with you, then in times like this, that's really going to show. When the money's coming in and the market's buoyant and basically you almost don't need to speak to people because it's going to take care of itself.
Yeah, nothing to see here.
You can crack on. But when you see times like this, you suddenly realise what you have around you and actually how people perceive you and the gaps in your capacity to hold space. Now, we often talk about holding space from the position of holding space with an opinion, but I think when you have those four quadrants in the green, we said red, amber, green, if they were in the green, I feel good personally, emotionally I feel strong, I'm connected to a personal vision of what I'm about and what this organisation's about, and mentally I have a strong intellectual position on my thoughts around what all these things stand for and my fluency on that topic, then I think you hold space because of your own personal clarity. And when you're able to hold space, that means you're less likely to be damaged by the influx of other people's anger or fear or whatever that might be. So I think this holding space in a leader resilience perspective is different to holding space on just an idea. And rather like that Marion Wilson quote, your behaviour enables others kind of things.
And I think it's also very important to take the opportunity to build resilience when you can, if you are connected enough to the moment. So do you remember, Guy, this might be months ago, it might be years ago, but you were, I think, at Birmingham New Street. You'd missed your train to go and see a potential new client. You realised you was going to be late. Now, in that moment, everybody has a choice as to where they place their energy and their focus. You can invest your energy and focus worrying about being late for a potential client meeting, but you took the opportunity to place your energy and focusing, going upstairs to that shopping environment at Birmingham New Street, sat down with a cup of coffee and just people watch for 20 minutes, knowing that it was going to be another 25 minutes before you get your next train. And your caption around that on Twitter at the time was build resilience when you can. And I think that's valid.
Come on, Stu, that's quite motivational. You've got to give me that.
I don't follow you online, mate. I don't know what that was.
What the hell's Twitter?
But others wouldn't, right? But others would choose to chew it over and worry and fret and stew themselves up. Sorry, Stu, no pun intended.
That's all right. My kind of closing view on it is I think it is. I think resilience is something that's developed through awareness and conscious choice. On those four areas are quite a nice kind of way to look at it. I think it's also just being what it isn't. A resilience isn't the thick-skinned, head down, I just do it anyway, everything bounces off me. Because I think that's an unattainable caricature of what resilience looks like. And I think what that actually drives is a bit of a mask and a bit of arming ourselves, which prevents some of those four things happening. And I think it's just being mindful of that.
I like that. It's great to bring that in. What resilience isn't. And it isn't those things. That's a lovely one. It isn't pretending. It isn't being the alpha, the tough person, in transactional analysis to try harder that's overdone. You don't have to be the caricature of invulnerable. In fact, are you able to show your vulnerability without being vulnerable? What isn't being resilient is really key, actually. That's a really good point to sort of factor in. So as we bring it to, I heard Stu's, my final perspective on this which is, I think he's a very clever way of telling us to bring this to a close.
Well done, mate.
Well done, mate. Yeah.
I was just conscious of the feedback on this. I was trying to be a bit subtle with that one. But
it's all right. People can turn it off.
I'd be amazed if they got this far.
Don't worry. There's at least 8 minutes that's going to be edited out where you tell Guy how uninspiring he is. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's gone. That's out. Oh, God. So, okay, so our closing position is what? What is resilience?
My frame around it would be know yourself well enough to make sure that you can do something about your resilience when you noticed it being threatened.
Yeah, I like that. The conscious competence to activate effort into doing something about it.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. On that note, we'll bring this to a close and I will see you all on the next one.
Nice one.
Cool, man.
Good talking to you both. Thank you.
And you, my friend.
That's it. Subscribe so you keep updated on new episodes. Visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with us and find out more. This has been Leadership Bites. See you soon.